Andy Hudson, welcome to the Fiduciary U Podcast. I am super excited about our conversation today. Welcome.
Thanks, Josh. Excited to be here and talk a little bit more about what you have going on with Fiduciary RX and what we see taking place with advisors as they're growing their practice in the 401k space.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, we I think have known of each other for some time, but got connected a few months ago and had a great kind of initial discussion in terms of, really what you're doing from a coaching and practice management standpoint for 401k advisors, and what I was doing on more of the tech side now, and found that there was some really kind of some complementary fit. So for listeners who don't know about you and about your company, why don't you just give a little bit of brief background of what you do and kind of how your career arc, how have you gotten there? Because you've been in the retirement industry for a pretty long time.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Got started in the business and have always had, an interest in business and how business works. And it started when I was working with one of the record keepers and first got into the business, was an enroller. I would go around and see the various businesses and whatever widget or service they provided, and would do the education. And then, through my career with record keeper, and then got into consulting after I left the record keeper and started my own firm, and have done some work with TPAs, do a lot of work with advisors on growing their practice. But how is it that you, as an advisor, how is it that you get your practice to the next level? So I'm with 401k Champions. We started in 2012 and just work with top 401k advisors on their practice, and kind of getting that next level in their practice around what we call the three pillars. It's your lead gen or sales, your service model, and your growth map. And what our finding has been, and I've seen this work, each advisor is a little bit different business, different skill set, all those things. But what we find across, it holds true for all advisors, is if you want to get to the next level, you've got to identify which of those three pillars is kind of a roadblock or a bottleneck in your practice, and then solve for work on that specific pillar. And that will create a tailwind, if you will, for helping you get to that next level for your practice. So always had an interest in business and how it works, and have kind of grown up in the retirement plan space, and that's where I've applied that interest. I think the thing that I love the most is working with advisors and getting to know them personally, building off the success that they've had. They're very, very successful, talented. I learn a lot from them. They learn a lot from our processes and what we've done with other advisors. And together, we're able to propel both their business and our business forward, which is a lot of fun. So, that was a zigzaggedy path, but that's how we've gotten to where we are today. So,
and when I think about your three pillars, when advisors get kind of in the business, right, we're kind of trained to be technicians, right? Working in the business. There's a great book, probably many people have read it, called, The E-Myth, and it kind of delineated between, working in the business versus working on the business. When I think about what you do and kind of your process and your methodology and how you support advisors, it's really helping them pick their head up in some ways from actually implementing the work to actually more of working on the work. And what do you find generally that is it just that what keeps a lot of advisors from actually working on the business? Is that they have so much growth and there's just so much work to do that they're kind of chasing their tail? What's the aha moment for an advisor where they say, you know what, I need to actually think more strategically about my practice and not just tactically in delivering the work, finding clients and then doing the work for them? What is that aha moment?
Yeah, good question. And I think it's different for each advisor, but I think in generality, would be you get to a point where you have to, right? We usually don't do things until we're forced to, and we realize that, hey, I can't continue doing the way it's no longer, because of the success that you've had in your practice. I can no longer do it the way that I've approached it, or I need to put more thought into the way that I approach it to build those efficiencies, training the team, doing those types of things so I can hand some of this off. I need to clone myself. So I don't think it's a heady, as much as of a understanding. I think everybody has the understanding, but it's when you get to that place in your business and it's like, okay, I've always had this understanding, but now this is a reality for me and my practice. The next step has to involve, how do we make, applications? And typically with those pillars, as an advisor, when you first get into the space, because of the nature of the business, you go out and you can sell a lot of different products. Maybe you started focusing on 401k. Maybe you started to focus on individual or, insurance or whatever. And then you found 401k and you added it as a complementary service, or you made it your primary. But you go out and you get some wins, and each plan sponsor, it's not really that advisor's fault, but each plan sponsor is has a different personality, different take on how often they want to see you and what they're looking for, what's important to them, and all those types of things. And naturally you pivot and you put a price on the services you value, they value the services, you get the business, you serve your clients well, but you put all those wins together, and all of a sudden you've got a practice that is very different from one client to the next, one prospect to the next. And you get to that point, what I said earlier, you're kind of forced to, okay, we really need to apply process. And I know, Josh, your background, your prior business, before you sold and started Fiduciary RX, you reached that milestone in the business several times, as we were talking about a few minutes ago, where you had to kind of, okay, what are we doing differently? How do we put this together in a way that makes sense, and those types of things. So I think it's a natural evolution that's usually driven through success. And you get to a point where, you realize, okay, there's another way to put this together. How do we do that? Where do we, who do we look to help us put that together? And that's what we do. So,
yeah. Yeah, there's a saying that necessity is the mother of invention, right? You
sure.
And I think that I know for myself that was, in building an advisory firm, our philosophy, we had what we called like a break and rebuild philosophy. And this idea that what got us to where we are wasn't going to get us to where we wanted to go. And so there was this kind of constant going back and breaking things down and then rebuilding them, and using the learnings that we had or the challenges that we had run into, and then letting that help kind of inform, okay, where do we go from here? You mentioned, and I think we talked about it in kind of the before we hit record, was this difference between a practice and a business. A lot of advisors say, hey, I have a business, but I would argue that most advisors have a practice. Having and a practice can be great. You can have the advisory business is wonderful. You can build an incredible lifestyle practice. You can make a really good living. You can do incredibly good, meaningful work. But having a practice and actually building a business, and maybe a better way to describe it is, because obviously you build an advisory practice, you're building a business of advisory clients. But to actually build an advisory business, there's a difference between having between those two things, building something that is more of an enterprise. A lot of practices are usually the goodwill is tied up in one or two or a handful of advisors and their support staff that kind of comes around them, to support them in implementing the work for the clients, and the goodwill is tied up. Building a business in many ways is something entirely different. It's something that where if you want to build a really good lifestyle practice, build it around you. If you want to build a really valuable enterprise, build it around systems and processes and other people, so that in many ways, if you've been successful, you can be unplugged from the equation and the business will still perpetuate. What are your thoughts in terms of that?
Yeah, I don't think, first of all, I don't think that there's a right or a wrong in this. I think it's a preference thing. So, I think practice, the amount that when an advisor wants to build a practice, more of what we call a lifestyle business, you may use some of the same language. I want to be able to extract myself for 2 months out of the summer, and do things with the family, or I may want to, there's an amount of extracting yourself, but you're primarily doing the work. Where in a business, we talked a little bit about this before we hit record, but you're taking a little bit less out of the business. You're reinvesting into the business. You're putting more infrastructure and things like that. And I heard entrepreneur, there's so much written on that, and, what is it, and all those types of things, and the differentiation, what the point was made. Entrepreneurs not doing the work, but figuring out how to put processes and other people in place to do the work. So I think business is more involved with that, where you've got a lot more infrastructure, if you will, from a staffing and from a process and from where you can, you are the visionary for the business, and then other people are executing on your vision. Where a practice is much more about, you are the face of the business. Your team is the face of the business. It's you're representing and growing, and you can, you've got all different levels of practices from a revenue generation standpoint, and you've got all different levels from a business standpoint. And I think there's reasons to do both. And I think it really depends on that, that particular advisor and what they, what are your aspirations and what do you want to build? But I think on both of those, you said this earlier. It's so easy once you get started, like learn to break it, right? It's through the process of breaking what you're currently doing. And by breaking, meaning going out and having the experience with participants, with plan sponsors, and getting that critical feedback to be able to build out and reinvent your processes. That's where you start to have the impact that you need to create the reputation that you need and all those types of things. So it's getting out there and kind of breaking it and reinventing it based, not what's in our head, but based on what our clients and prospects are telling us is top of mind for them, that we can help them with and drive value. So there's that breaking of the process, breaking it down, reinventing the process, whether you're on the practice side or you're on the business side, that is so critical to, propelling your business to the next level.
Yeah, we used to call it capacity building, right? There have been some studies that have been out there. Dimensional used to do and still does, I think, some really good practice benchmarking studies and whatnot. And, I think when I looked at that, at that data, it was interesting, and I agree with you completely, is that there is no right or wrong answer for everyone. There's a right or wrong answer for individuals. It is very much a preference. There's some people who say, you know what, I don't want to run a 25 or 30 or 40 or 50 person firm. I don't want kind of those, those challenges and headaches. I want a nimble, 3, 5, 7, 10 person team. That's really kind of what I want. What's interesting is I think, lifestyle practices tend to be really higher profitability, higher income, less enterprise value, and they tend to grow slower because you're not reinvesting as much in the business. You're pulling out as much profit and income as you can current year. It means that it's going to limit, it's all trade-off management. It's going to limit your ability to capacity build. So your growth is going to be slower, but your profitability is going to be higher. The flip side of that, if you're building more of what I would consider to be more of like an enterprise approach, you tend to have lower profitability because you're reinvesting back in the business. You're not stripping everything out, but you tend to have, higher growth. And I know from the dimensional studies and some others it was typically somewhere maybe like 6 to 8% lower profitability for high growth firms. but their growth was much more accelerated and their enterprise value was much more accelerated. So I totally agree that it really comes down to, and this is, designing your practice or your business, I think with intentionality is absolutely critical. Beginning with the end in mind. What do you want? Recognize that's going to entail some trade-offs, but then you kind of work backwards. And I love, what you said about kind of the iteration is, I know my philosophy has always been, and I had mentioned this to you before we started recording it, but whether it was about business, whether it's about technology I'm building now, I take what I call a build, test, validate approach.
Right.
I build something. I don't put massive amounts of money or effort into the build phase. The build phase is really like running an experiment. I want to build something, and then as quickly as possible, I want to test it. I want to test it with my clients. I want to test it with my prospects. I want to test it with participants, with plan sponsors. I want to get valuable feedback. What works, what doesn't work. Sometimes the experiments I come up with, I have a hypothesis and I'm like, this is going to work great. And it doesn't.
Right.
And then other cases, I'm like, I just stumble onto something that I try and I don't really have high expectations. And I'm like, wow, this really, really worked. And so you want to be able to build, get something to market as quickly as possible, test it, get feedback.
Yeah.
And then based on the learnings of that feedback, that will validate whether the idea is a good one or a bad one. And then when you find the good ideas, now we're going to start to throw some gas on the fire. We're going to put the foot down on the accelerator, lean into this, and really, really push it forward. And I think advisors would be well served to think of yourself as a scientist and just run as many experiments as you can. And that's the whole, build and re-break approach. And don't be scared of things not working. My philosophy has always been in business that I'm not afraid to fail. What I'm afraid to do is fail slowly and fail backwards. My philosophy is always, I want to fail fast and I want to fail forward.
It's a great one.
But I'm going to keep moving forward. I'm not going to get gun shy don't be afraid. Failing and failures are two totally different things. Yeah. If you're not willing to experience some measure of failure, you will fail long term. But if you embrace the process of failure, right, you're going to have a lot more success long term.
And if we double click on that a little bit, the invention, you're following the lead. So if you're in your practice and you have some clients that you're working with, and there's a need for those key clients, they're like, this is a great fit client wise. They have the same philosophy and they're dedicated and they're just kind of your ideal client, and they have a particular need. That usually is the leading indicator to where you can be creative and apply that process and say, okay, let me help them solve for this, because I realize that, sorry, there's a fire station right down the road from my office. So I'll solve for that, and I'm creative around that. And I see how does that actually meet, I think this will work, and let me present it to them, and let me see if it actually solves. And then what I find, Josh, I find, so fascinating is I'll come up with a couple of good ideas, and the one I think is going to be a slam dunk isn't the one that they necessarily are focused on, because I get more reaction. Oh, that's fantastic. And I know you've seen this at Fiduciary X, or how they describe it back to you. And you're like, man, that's a fantastic phrase, or so like break it I love the way the context that you're saying break it. We're not just trying to break things and lose clients, but we're breaking things from the standpoint of inventing and quickly listening, solving for, things that aren't being solved for in the marketplace, driving up value. And then one of the big things that comes out, I think, of each of our conversation today and my past conversations with you, is things have to go proprietary. You have to create a proprietary process, because we live in an era, if you think back, Josh, when you first got into the space, it was, you're either a dabbler in the space or you're a specialist. And the differentiator was how long that list of services that you provided, right? So it's 338, 321, fiduciary, go down the list. And that was the differentiator, because most advisors weren't focusing on that. But if today, when we talk to advisors that are specializing in the marketplace, Andy, the issue that I keep running into is I go up and present when they bring in another specialist team from, here locally or someplace, across the country, they're presenting the same things. So they're going to benchmark, they're going to do all these critical things that we need to do for the plan. And how do we differentiate? How do we make this, you and I were talking about some specific software, when you present the software solution that you're using, it's not your process. It's not your methodology. So you've got to get to proprietary, and you've got to get specific around what it is that those ideal clients are wanting to solve for, and then break it as quickly as possible, learning from that feedback that they give you, so that the next prospect that you meet with, your next client meeting, if they're facing, and that's on their radar, that same thing that you just invented and tweaked and made better with your one prospect or your one client is probably going to add value and add more, organizational intelligence and all that kind of stuff that you can, continue to build out. So break your own models intentionally, saying, okay, this was iteration 1 or phase 1. This was good, but man, phase 2, we've really got it better. And then what does phase 3 look like? And what does phase 4 look like, using the market, clients and prospects to drive your thinking and drive what the deliverables are, or leave it alone, drop it. If it doesn't resonate, it doesn't, demonstrate value or do something of value to that prospect or client, don't put any, to your point earlier, don't put any effort into it. Just let it go.
And it's interesting. Like there's a concept in behavioral economics of like sunk costs. And a lot of times, like we get so married, like a sunk cost, that we're unwilling to, it's like when you see a stock go down, and it's like, I feel so invested in this that I can't be disciplined about like, hey, it's gone down. I used to hear this with rebalancing with clients, like, yeah, but if I sell it, like it doesn't have a chance to come back. And I'm like, you only have permanent capital loss if you sell something when it's down and you go to cash. Like if we sell something, we rebalance and we get right back invested in the market. Like you're still in, when the market comes back, like you're going to be okay. And so it's easy to get these kind of sunk costs. I would say even now from a tech standpoint with Fiduciary X, I share this with advisors, like a big mistake is, don't make the brand of the tools you use bigger than your own brand. Brand your process. And I was very much a proprietary. I wanted to check all the boxes. When I first started, and when I was, I had a very differentiated story. I told it, and not many people told the story I did early on. Over time, though, you go into any advisor, heck, you could license certain platforms, and now you can check a box and say, hey, we do. Like you said, it got way hard. What I found was it got harder. It got harder to differentiate the story. What I found over time was the move towards specialization meant that there were fewer competitors who could sit in front of a plan sponsor and really show they were a specialist, but every specialist. So there was less competitors, but the competition was way more fierce, because the people who could get to the next step in the conversation, everybody was good. And so you have to figure out a way to check all the boxes of everybody else. But you have to be able to package it differently. Even with Fiduciary X, like Fiduciary X, I think is an incredibly, no shock here. Like I'm biased because I think it's a phenomenal tool for advisors to use, but don't elevate the brand of Fiduciary X above your own brand. Fiduciary X is simply, it's a tool that you use to implement and execute your process. That's the big challenge for plan sponsors, is when they look at advisors. And this is another thing. Don't sell around the services you offer, in my opinion. Sell around the actions you take and the outcomes you achieve. Like that, it's because it's really hard for a plan sponsor that looks at two advisors and they go to their websites and they say they do all the same things. Well, then how do I differentiate between the two of that? It's kind of like getting married. Like you can date somebody, you can be engaged, but until you like live with somebody day to day and you sleep next to them every day, and you really find out whether or not you're compatible. And I've seen that with advisors. Like a plan sponsor doesn't know if they have a really good advisor until they've actually lived with them for a little while. And you start to see like, hey, you could have two advisors that say they do the same things. They could have all the same exact tools, but the advisor that is more effective and capable at using those tools to drive outcomes and then to visualize that for client, that's the advisor who's gonna, it's kind of a crapshoot for plan sponsors. They don't know until they get into it whether they have a good advisor or not. And a lot of times they don't know until they have a better experience. They go through, they're married, it's not a good marriage, they get divorced, they're a little like guarded. But then when they find like Mr. and Mrs. Right, it's like, oh, I had no idea that this was so much, so much better. C.S. Lewis is was a theologian, and I've read a lot of his stuff, and he had a great analogy. He said that, and he was talking about matters of faith and stuff like that. But he said that what most people are like, they're like little kids playing in mud puddles, making mud pies, because they can't envision what a holiday at the beach actually would be like. And so I think as an advisor, and I'll wrap it this part here as I've rambled a little bit, but as an advisor, your job is to help your prospects and clients understand and experience a holiday at the beach, not play in mud puddles, making mud pies.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's such a difference too, Josh. There's a lot to what you're saying there. At point of sale, when you're meeting with a prospect, they haven't experienced how you deliver, right? Your team, your method of communication, your follow-up, all those things. So many advisors we work with, they've got that right. It's a fantastic experience. But before that decision is made, when multiple advisors are lined up that perform the similar tasks, it's how do we proprietize that process so they look different, and we give them a little bit of a taste of what it's going to be like after they get the nod and they say, okay, we're going to hire you. Let's move forward. So it's almost it almost seems unfair sometimes, because it's like, we know that once they say yes and give the nod, your team is going to do a fantastic job. But how do we create that before you get the yes? How do we make it proprietary? How do we, and I love, like, I think it goes to impact, right? It's being able to have impact on the plan sponsor around the areas. So one of the things is pushing to proprietary, which I think, is going to be one of the things you hear from our conversation today, throughout, but pushing to proprietary, but then also double clicking on what's top of mind for that particular prospect or plan sponsor, because it's almost just like you go to the doctor. We've talked about this before, but you go to the doctor for knee pain. You don't really want to hear about why, it's interesting, maybe the doctor's interesting and you want to understand their background. How'd you get into medicine? That might be interesting, but really the reason you're there is because of the knee pain. It's not his overall philosophy.
You want to be healed.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to be able to run again next week, right? Or whatever it is. And yes, you want to know that he understands all the other things that play into the knee, so that if you have an issue that comes up down the road, he can address that as well, but you really need so proprietary, and then double clicking on figuring out what is it they're meeting with you for a reason. Right. Yeah. And I think the tendency is, as an advisor, and we all do it in our own business, is we've built this thorough process. We're students of the game. We understand, more than the plan sponsor, what the moving parts are and what needs to change, all that kind of stuff. And we want to talk about all these good things, all these various topics that are the core disciplines, I'll call them, to managing the plan. But there's one core discipline or one issue that's the reason that you're meeting with them. And so being able to demonstrate a proprietary process, and also figure out in your process, flush out what's top of mind, and get to the knee pain, right? Talk about the knee pain, fix that, and paint the picture that, hey, I have a proprietary process that will deal with your knee pain. But guess what? When you double in size 2 years from now, it's not going to be knee pain anymore. It's going to be something else. And our process has all the core disciplines built in. So we'll be able to add value today for the reason that we're meeting today and, down the road. So proprietary, and then get specific on what the pain point, why are they meeting with you now? And those two things really differentiate and set apart when we are in a mature market like we are, where it's a list of tasks and those types of things.
Yeah. When that's, you think about Fiduciary RX and concept that pioneers this concept of fiduciary wellness. And literally part of the tagline with Fiduciary RX is to diagnose, prescribe, and improve fiduciary wellness. Using a medical metaphor, the best doctors, look, when you have knee pain, you're probably you don't want to go see your general practitioner about knee pain.
Right.
They're a generalist. They're very good at what they do. But when you have an acute issue like knee pain, like you want to go see an orthopedic specialist, right?
Yep.
And the best orthopedic specialists, it's about where they went to school, but are they doing research? A lot of the most, successful orthopedics have created because as they've operated, a lot of them, the ones that get really wealthy are the ones who've actually created a knee replacement methodology, or they create the hardware that goes in that they built to kind of help them, goes back to the private, that they built to kind of help them get better outcomes. As a doctor, as an orthopedic specialist, your job is to help your patients achieve a high quality of life. Right. And so it really comes down to what you're saying. So many advisors want to come in and they want to prescribe right off the bat. But in order to prescribe effectively, you have to diagnose accurately. And so, the other thing, just to use that, is the doctor's going to ask you, okay, well, how did this happen? What other symptoms are you dealing with? They want to know what has happened. I'm dealing with, I tore a ligament in my foot almost 8 weeks ago playing basketball with one of my sons. I'm going to a really good orthopedic. Yeah. And I did my research. He went to a really good school. He's part of a really good practice. They work with, the Baltimore Ravens and the Baltimore Orioles. He's one of the team doctors. The guy checks all the boxes. Right. But we spent a little bit of time, 5 minutes. Okay, how did this happen? Well, I was playing basketball with my son and I stepped on his foot. Okay, well, did you feel a pop? Did you feel, well, here's what happened and this is what it felt like? He spent a couple of minutes asking me, well, how did it happen? Then he spent a decent amount of time diagnosing. He put me through a series of tests. I did an X-ray. I did an MRI. I did a different type of X-ray. He used his hand to kind of manipulate my foot to see where my pain was presenting. And he's like, look, I had this really bad, it's called a Lisfranc injury. A lot of NFL guys get it, ends their careers. It's a very rare injury. But he was able to diagnose by manipulating my foot. And he said, look, he's like, I think it's partially torn. The MRI is a little inconclusive. The X-rays are a little inconclusive. But if this was a fully ruptured, this ligament, when I do this, and he manipulated my foot, he's like, you would hit the roof. You're not hitting the roof right now, which leads me to believe that you have a partial, I can see on the MRI, it looks like there's a partial rupture. So here's we could do surgery. You're looking at 12 months recovery. I'm not going to operate on you because I don't think you need the surgery. I've been doing this. I've seen this a lot. What I think is this is going to be the method. Let's put you in a boot. Let's put you non-weight bearing for 4 weeks. Come back and see me. I went back after 4 weeks. He looked, he said, hey, you've made a lot of progress. We can always operate down the road. I don't think we're going to need to do that. Here's the next phase of the treatment. You're going to do this, and then you're going to make an appointment. And the guy diagnosed me really, really accurately. And then he prescribed a series of approaches. He could have gone, hey, we need to do surgery. But based on the fact that he was experienced, and this is an injury that gets misdiagnosed all the time and tends to have really bad outcomes. But the fact that he knows this injury, he knows what to look for. And so, like, I think as an advisor, like, that's a really, really good playbook. You need to diagnose accurately, find out what the issues, find out what the pain points are. But then you need to take a look and figure out, okay, well, where are they now? But then more importantly, like, I didn't care after I talked to him for 10 minutes. I didn't care where he went to school. I didn't care of any of that. Could he heal me? And he gave me, I was like, I've been reading on the internet. He's like, stop doing that. Like, that's just not good. I'm like, looks like a disaster. He's like, okay, Dr. Google. He's like, stay off that. He's like, this is all the reasons why all those people, like, why they write what they do. It was probably misdiagnosed. He's like, there's different levels of injury with this. He's like, you're fortunate you're on a less severe. But he had all that experience that he brought. I could have gone to see another orthopedic that had never seen this type of injury before. And I guarantee you, I would not have, it either would have been misdiagnosed, or the treatment path that he he or she would recommend wouldn't be the best treatment path. And so I think that's a really good model, is diagnose effectively, prescribe accurately, and then present this better fiduciary future. He's very encouraging to me when I was like, I think my life, like, I'm never going to get back. And he's like, stop worrying about all of that. Next, like, let's do this in 3 to 4 week intervals. And as you progress, we will see where we go from there. I think that's a really good model.
Yeah. Great way to think about it. And and once he's listened, one of the interesting things that came up in a conversation here within the last couple of weeks with an advisor we work with was, depending on the size plan, the amount of information with the larger plans where you've got a CFO involved, and I'll bring this back to the doctor analogy, but with the CFOs involved and trained HR professional and stuff like that, they are trained to bring in the kind of what the doctor did, gather the data, and then make sure that they understand the criteria on what the decision that's being made or should be made, what the outcome, what the prescription needs to be. And then you have smaller plans where you have a business owner or you have a practice manager or somebody like that that's not been trained in the 401k retirement plan space, and they don't necessarily want to gather all that information. They want to know that you can gather all the information and prescribe what it is. So you have that's another challenge that we have taking place in the marketplace. If you work with smaller plans under 10 million and you work with larger plans, you're going to prescribe, that exact scenario that you prescribed about your foot, you're going to react differently and prescribe it differently based on what the plan size. So it's a great model, but you also have to adapt that model based on what is it that they're looking for. Do they want to gather data and make that decision internally and understand all the facts, or do they want to just be, hey, we've done this information? And what came out of that conversation, Josh, was interesting, because the level of detail around the questions, and you're saying, he manipulated your foot a certain way and asked questions. Does this hurt? What's the pain level here? And those very detailed questions that you ask the plan sponsor, where once they've told you where the pain is, where you're really trying to understand, you're demonstrating expertise by the questions that you ask, and everybody else is staying at a 10,000 foot level. Well, you have fiduciary concerns. Okay, tell us a little bit about that. And, there's a 2-sentence dialogue, and then they're on to the next topic. There's no really in-depth examination of understanding. And through that process with the plan sponsor, just as the doctor did with you, you have the ability of asking questions, really getting clarity on what's going on with that plan. Yeah. And through that experience is very different than somebody else that goes through and just shows a laundry list of, we address the fiduciary concerns, or we benchmark your plan, or whatever that is. That experience, on paper, they're identical. The experience side of things is totally different, which I think is the impact pre-engagement, which is so critical. So proprietary, and then just understanding, okay, I need to adapt my approach based on what they're looking for. Are they gathering the data, or are they, just wanting general guidance? I don't want to deal with this. P&C and some of those types of things, you just want to describe what's going on and have them prescribe what you need to cover it and then move on to the next thing. Where other things you kind of want to understand a little bit more detail and want to be able to make the decision, confirm the decision yourself. But I love that about where our paths crossed. I saw what you put out with Fiduciary RX, and it complemented the work with a number of our advisors that we were working on, because it pushed to proprietary. And after you push to proprietary, you need to be able to deliver and demonstrate that the process works. And, we've talked about gamification. We've talked about, just if you're on a weight loss, somebody will tell you something as simple as get a scale, because you need to be able to track the numbers and see which direction you're moving on the scale. And so it applies in all facets, but it's pushed to proprietary. And then you have to be able to demonstrate that there's improvement, that they can track it through their own lens, not what I'm just telling them that, hey, your plan is much better now than a nebulous comment like your plan is so much better now after you've hired us than it was before. And they're kind of scratching their head. We like you. We like what you've done, but how are you quantifying? How are you, how would you validate that? So I was excited to see Fiduciary RX, and it'll be interesting to see how you evolve, listening to what the advisors and what the plan sponsors need, and this first iteration, and how you can help meet the, next iteration of value.
And I've rolled out some really cool fee visualization and optimization capabilities, which went back to my old process of continuing to kind of build out the platform. And and part of that's listening to advisors. Part of it, my secret sauce was I was an advisor. So it's not like I'm a technology person that's kind of never sat in the seat. Like, I always built things to solve problems that I had where I couldn't find. Like, my philosophy was, if I can find a tool to do what I want that fits into my process, then that's the path of least resistance. But when I would run into issues and problems that there was no current solution, I would build it. I would build that myself. And that kind of goes back to the break and the rebuild, and the, constantly trying to, constantly trying to iterate from that perspective. But yeah, that gamification piece of being able to, I'll give you just a little, advisors listening to this, like, here's a little tidbit. So case studies, in my opinion, are one of the most effective ways you can demonstrate your value. I've talked about it on the podcast. I've talked about it on the podcast before. But for your clients, a lot of times you have to draw you have to like paint the picture for them. And the way you can do that is with, I think, with case studies and technology. Fiduciary RX allows you to do this really quickly, is you can show people, here's where you were, here's where we've come from. So, I'm actually, every now and then something comes across, my plate. I get kind of I do a little bit of consulting here and there.
Sure.
And I got introduced to, like a $300 million plan, and they were looking for a new advisor. And, I asked me if I could kind of run that process for them. And I said, yeah, absolutely. I want to make sure, and they have a very good advisor currently, but they needed to go through an RFP process. And so I put together an RFP, but in the RFP, and I broke it down, because my model is Fiduciary RX, is fiduciary governance, plan design, fee structure, investment process, participant support, and provider management. So that was like the 6 components of the RFP. And I actually surveyed the committee members, each individually, on which of to stack rank those 6 areas in order of individual priority. And then I came up with a score for the committee on what what those 6, how they were stack ranked. And I went back to advisors, part of the RFP. I'm like, look, these are the 6 priorities. Here's the one that's the highest. Here's the one that's the lowest. And in the RFP, I said, look, in each one of these areas, I'm going to give you the roadmap on, like, don't talk about number 6 that much, because number 1 is the highest priority.
Right.
But I said in the RFP was list 1 to 2 case studies, how you've helped your clients achieve outcomes in these areas. And I told each advisor, hey, this is your chance to really demonstrate like how you've gotten outcomes. So focus on these case studies. These are probably all the other questions are check the box, but this is a way where you can really position what you do, what you believe, how you do it. For the incumbent, and I prepped with each advisory firm, to give them insight. But one of the things I said with case studies to them is, if it was me, I would, you're fighting from a position of strength. For those case studies, I wouldn't talk about like other clients. I'd talk about exactly what you've done for them over the course of the history, because you're in a position where everybody else is hypothetical. They've lived with you. And it was just a really fascinating, like if you get RFP'd for an existing client, put in case studies with the specific metrics and things you've achieved for your clients.
Or that particular client.
And when you present to them, be like, look, you're going to talk to other firms. They're going to talk to you about what they hypothetically could do for you. Here's what we've actually done
for you.
And that may win the deal for you. It may not, but you're going to be in a better position if you can kind of draw those conclusions and those outcomes. It's really, really important for prospects. You need to cast vision. It's not about where they've come from. Help them understand where they are, but more importantly, help them understand where you're going to take them together over time.
Right.
And for your clients, it's really important for you to visualize, here's where we've come over time. Here are all the things that we've done. Here's what we've accomplished. Clients are not going to remember all that stuff on their own. You have to paint that picture for them.
Yep. Yeah, I love that. One of the things, taking that case study, one of the things we do a lot of, it's called advisor IP. And Josh, we basically we've gone through and worked with advisors with all the major BDs and independents and whatever. And pitch book is their 401k pitch book. How do you present your services at point of sale? And one of the things that's always included in there is usually included is a grouping of logos for the clients they currently work with. And so one of the kind of everything, it's kind of a 1, 2, 3 punch type thing, but it's, what's your proprietary process? Who are you running it for from a logo standpoint? And then to your point, what's ranked number one? There's a whole complexity level with a committee, because it's not just one person that's driving it. Sometimes it is one person that's domineering over everybody else, but you're dealing with the committee decision. What's that particular issue? And then using a case study for deliverability. So you've taken what in generality is left, and we're always looking at, okay, what is everybody else saying? And that first, it's almost like a lemonade stand. It's that simple. If I'm lined up next to 10 other lemonade stands and I'm yell lemonade and everybody else is saying lemonade, it doesn't matter how great my lemonade is. Nobody's going to hear us because they're tuning everybody out that's saying the same thing. So the first thing you have to realize is, what is everybody else saying? Well, everybody else is saying, here are all the logos of the clients we work with, which is a great statement. We're all for that, but everybody else is saying that. So it's almost like that lemonade analogy that they aren't hearing it. So how do you bring those logos to life around the specific area that they just told you is the area of concern for them? And case studies and demonstration of proprietary process is one of the most powerful combinations that they can do. In my opinion, Fiduciary RX, you've just, put a plug and play solution where you don't have to do backflips to collect data and track these things, both for case study and for actual client, track record of what you've done, value you've added, and those types of things. And Josh, your point about how quickly we forget, right? There's so many things going on in our lives. There's so many things going on in our plan sponsor committee members' lives. They don't remember. They have to go back and say, okay, here, when you came in, I think a number you threw out was that most plans score around a 35 when they come in and initially take the analysis. And then as you move them through the process and show them, you've demonstrated that exact, the value, the impact that you've had to that plan. And beyond, like, our conversation today has been focused on growth of revenue, winning new business, and we all love that, right? But beyond that, I think there's another value that we see in our business is working with advisors that are just great to work with. You mentioned in interviewing prospects and not just being interviewed. But when you find that fit, it's not just executing tasks and responsibilities you need to do for that plan. It's not just consulting with a particular advisor on how to get their business to the next level, but there's a friendship formed, and there's celebration of wins, and it's a joy to work with when those things are applied. Reputation expanded, referrals are made, all those types of things. So it's really, if you contrast that versus just like every prospect is just a sword fight trying to win that plan. And then because there's no processes and there's nothing proprietary. And the next one is, and nobody's really helping you because you haven't made yourself referable by getting your value prop where it needs to be and getting that proprietary process. You're keeping yourself in that early stage of business, and every win is just like, picking up a boulder and trying to carry the thing, rather than creating that flywheel concept that you and I have talked about. Where it's like, once I start to get momentum, apply process, get validation, continue to drive more value, the thing starts to spin itself. And now I'm in a cadence that is enjoyable, that I can train my team around, that I can hand off and do some of those things. So a lot of advisors, because they're not going through it, hopefully this is making sense, because they're not going through that process of proprietary, getting specific, demonstrating logos a little bit differently, they're making themselves work harder to get the wins. And they're having, fee compression and all those things are entering in, where you make a couple slight adjustments and you no longer have to carry a boulder, you're carrying, a pebble. You're still doing the work, but it's so much more enjoyable and things like that. So yes, revenue, yes, growth, yes, getting to the next level of your business, but also enjoying working with those clients and driving success for them is such a huge thing, I think, for my business. And, I've heard it in the things you've said. And I think also for the advisors that are listening, listening to the podcast that's one of the major wins that I think can be unlocked by using a Fiduciary RX and putting some proprietary processes in place, in their business.
I also think too, and this goes back to, working on the business and really understanding the analytics of your practice. One of my philosophies is that there's riches in niches. And so part of this is understanding, and this will seem a little out there, but I think it's worth the time and effort, is finding common threads within your current practice. How many engineering firms do you have? How many medical practices? How many construction companies do you have? Every advisor probably has, a handful of, different industry niches. Well, then start to think about what are the size of those plans on average? What are some of the common issues that they run into? What are some of the experiences, those case studies? What have you done? So the logo piece, instead of just flashing a bunch of logos, do you think it would be more powerful if it was an engineering firm and you went in and you were like, hey, these are the 6 other engineering firms that we work with. Yep. Here were some of the issues that we've seen. This is how, that they've run into. Here are some of the outcomes that we've gotten for them. We understand your business because it's a niche we focus on. We understand your demographic, what your people challenges are or opportunities. We understand your human capital needs. Right. Even starting to then put your pitch. So come up with your pitch, but then come up with industry narratives. Like an example. With an engineer, I had a good number of engineering clients. I did everything. There was something called the ENR, the Engineering News Record. That was the trade publication. I subscribed to it. I read all the articles every month in the ENR magazine because I wanted to understand what was going on with engineering firms. And so I would send articles to clients at times. Hey, I read about this. I thought about you. Or I'd be sitting in the committee meeting. I was like, I just read this in ENR, is this an issue that you're dealing? And it was funny, there was no doubt that very few advisors that I would compete with understood engineering firms the way that I did. And I even would talk about, look, you engineer a plan for success or failure. Our job is really to be like the general contractor, right? We're going to come up with and the architect. We're going to come up with kind of the blueprint, the strategy. Some we have internal where we'll be the subcontractors and we'll do the work directly. We're going to go out and hire subs in other different areas where we don't have the in-house expertise, but where you need it. And we're going to make sure that we oversee those subs and that they're doing their job. And ultimately, our goal is to deliver the project, right. At a high level, on time, and at or under budget. Like I would put it in, like that was my narrative. You could do it with a medical, like a doctor, if you have a lot of doctor's practices. Hey, our job is really to be like the general practitioner. We're going to come in, we're going to diagnose, prescribe. If we need to like refer you to like a specialist for something that you're really dealing with, we're going to provide that referral. We're going to bring them in. We're going to continue to make sure that they're delivering the standard of care. So I actually think that's like a next level direction that you could go instead of just, hey, here are the companies we work with. People want to know that you work with people like them. And if you can speak their language, if you can create a whole narrative for them that describes your proprietary process and the work that you do, in my opinion, that's the way you start to really stand apart.
It's a great way. You put the boulder down when you've done that and you picked up the pebble. It's now enjoyable. You're now much more referable, because one of the things that we keep seeing with advisors on the value prop, when you talk in generalities, you're really not referable. How do you, when somebody says, hey, they manage our plan for us and they do a great job, or I really trust them, or whatever, those are compliments, but it's not referable. And to your point, Josh, if you did double down on an engineering firm and you specified, we work with engineering firms in this space and we use our proprietary process, to drive these outcomes that, engineering firms are hyper focused on. Yep. Now that engineering firm, you've talked around that, they now have a value prop. They can speak to their other engineer. Well, Josh is a fantastic advisor. He's got this process that is focused in on engineering firms. You've got to talk to him. Well, I just turned a compliment into a referral. So getting to that sweet spot for an advisor's business, it doesn't have to be, a lot of times, and that's the fun part of what we do, it doesn't have to be as difficult and hard a path to get to the next level as we sometimes think in our own heads. It's a couple critical changes around the proprietary, around documenting, around gamifying and showing results and those types of things. And then that creates just this, just a completely different experience from I mentioned the 3 pillars: lead gen, service model, and growth map. All 3 pillars are affected when you start to do some of those things, depending on where you are from a revenue standpoint.
And you need to change that conversation, like change that, the way that your lemonade stand, right? Instead of, hey, we sell lemonade, to more of like, we sell pink lemonade infused with antioxidants. Like that's how you stand apart. It's not like we just give you lemonade.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
What as we kind of wrap up here, just kind of share a little bit. I mean, you've mentioned a number of these things, the pillars. I know you have a number of different programs that you offer, as well. Like, what are you looking, and this we don't have time to unpack it, but you kind of alluded to it, is, the goal of business isn't to work with everybody. It's to find that kind of your tribe where you can build these kind of raving fans, and you can build, like, the goal is to work with people that align with your vision and your value and your capabilities. They make much better clients instead of the ones that are misaligned. Right. What are you looking for in terms of like advisors that may be listening that are saying, hey, I want to take this thing to the next level? Like, what does the ideal advisor client look like for you?
That's a great question. So just like you probably, advisors qualify their plans based on assets and things like that. We usually look at production, and it's usually $1 million and up in production, where we engage with that advisor in what we call the 401k advisor playbook. And it's identifying which pillar is holding the business back and then helping them walk through and address some of the issues that we've helped other advisors address that are in a similar position to you, and help you move through that quickly to pull those levers and get to that next level. So a lot of it is around tactics, is around, and a lot of the advisors, Josh, that we work with, there's not a deficiency. They're fantastic salespeople. They've built a very successful practice. They don't need to work with us to make an extra dollar or two. But they still have the motivation to try to, how do I get to the next level? I know I need to do things differently. I know I need somebody that's used to looking at an advisor's practice. It doesn't matter how you're registered. And I want to pull this apart, figure out where the gaps are, where we can put some things in place. Where is it breaking down, like we talked about in our process? And then how do we double down and add value for those right types of plans so that we can win more of those, stay away from the plans that are not a fit for us, that we will never, serve well, or where they'll appreciate the value that we're driving for them. So it's called the 401k Advisor Playbook. And it's just our one-to-one, methodology of coaching advisors that are, $1 million or above. Under that, if they're under that production number, those tactics still work for them on their lead gen, service model, and growth map. It's just we deliver them through webinars, through video training, and those types of things where it's not a one-on-one, nature as far as that goes. There's also the 401k sales call, which we have every 2 weeks, which is a free way to hear sales ideas, and just join us. We'll talk about, last week you talked about a study that came out and took a little bit different, take on what I'm seeing from LinkedIn and how to apply that study and how to use it, and some of the conversations around, lead gen and trying to work your prospect list and different things like that. So there's a number of ways to get involved, but we'd love to, reach out to me on LinkedIn, Andy Hudson, and love to find out what you're doing in your business and what you're trying to solve for. And if we can help you, we'd love to. So
that's great. And I'll make sure in the show notes, but I'll throw up LinkedIn there. How else can people, where can they go? Where can they engage with you? How can they stay connected to you?
Yeah, just the 401k sales call is a great one. 401kchampions.com is the website. And there's a lot of information on there. Feel free to email me at andy@401kchampions.com. The biggest thing is we love to learn about an advisor's practice and what's going on. Students of the game like to listen to what, we look for repetition in issues and what you're trying to solve for. And if we can offer something in-house to help you with that, or if we can refer you to, Josh, you and I, we've worked with some mutual clients because your ability of Fiduciary RX to gamify and give a process to being able to show the value that's driven through that proprietary process, I think is so critical. So if there's a resource out there like yours, it would point you in that direction, kind of help you connect the dots on that. But
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a really fun conversation, Andy, and love what you're doing. I mean, I think, if you look at just look at all of the, most elite athletes that are out there, they all have they have coaches. Even Tiger Woods has, had a swing coach, best player in the world for a really long time. Like, everybody needs, I think, a coach, and appreciate what you're doing for the industry, the way that you're helping advisors. And thanks for being a guest on the show. And I hope and am confident that advisors have gotten a lot of value out of kind of the I think the systematic way that you think about things, and that the structure that you bring. So thank you so much. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah, Josh, thanks for having me on, and continued success with Fiduciary RX. I'm excited to see, as you start to go the enterprise and help individual advisors with that solution. Excited to see what you're building and continue to build that out. So thanks. Enjoyed the conversation.
Likewise.